Okay, this is exciting. Away we go. So, quick overview for what we're going to cover today. I first want to start by talking about self-care and why this is so important in the context of your role as leaders, managers, supervisors, and particularly in the context of how you best lead a team who are now possibly all working from home full time. I imagine for some of you, you might have teams that are sort of in the office week on, week off. But it certainly seems for the foreseeable future, for the next month or two at least, that we are moving into and staying in an environment where people are all working from home, and we need to manage that. So we're going to talk about self-care and why it's so important. We're also going to spend a little bit of time just getting into the empathy space and trying to understand a little better just what's going on for some of our team at the moment, and again why this is important for us as leaders. We're also going to talk about helping our teams to focus on shared goals, so making sure that we're all on the same page to some extent, and we'll also talk about just what some of those goals might be. Another part we'll talk about in the webinar is bringing focus and clarity into remote meetings. It can often be a challenge to run an effective meeting when we have everyone in the same room at the same time. How do we then migrate that into an environment where, again, we've got people in 10, 15, 20 different locations and still manage to get some real value out of remote meetings? So we have some specific tips to share with you around that. And then the last piece is about communication. And how we need to ramp up, perhaps, our communication as leaders in the environment in which we're currently operating to help build, maintain more trust, more rapport, more open communication with our teams, to help them all feel connected and to ensure that we are getting things done. That is it for today. Thanks for joining us. Hope it was fun. See you next time. Question for you before we kick off. What are the some of the challenges, and again, I'd love for you to share through the chat function if you can, what are some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment as you lead your teams remotely? What's coming up for you? Feel free to, again, just type some of your concerns, any questions you might have, anything that you're noticing. Thanks, Kathleen. So uncertainty for staff around continuing employment, which can be a real fear at the moment. From Samantha, thank you, Samantha, keeping teams focused, communicating without over-communicating. We are going to talk about that more. Wendy, thank you, again, getting the balance of communication right, which is not always easy. And a great one from Reese. We have a new starter. It's difficult to train someone remotely. Yes, it is. We might have some tips for you, perhaps not necessarily on this call, but afterwards, Reese, if you want to reach out to us in terms of how we can help people learn remotely. From Chris, great to see you on this call again today. Chris, usual channels for communications have broken down, or perhaps not functioning as well as they were. Thank you. From Natalie, telecommunications broadly and accessibility to comms and to people, I'm guessing. Thanks, Natalie. From Freya, hi Freya. Keeping team report going, particularly for team members new to the organisation. And from another Natalie, keeping them motivated and focused. Great, thank you. And one last one I'll share quickly with Bridget, from Bridget. Thanks, Bridget. Staff struggling with family work balance now that kids are at home. It's like, it's all fun. It's all different. We have munchkins in the house when normally I don't have to worry about that. So thank you for sharing all of that. And again, hopefully we'll be able to give you some tips that will help you work through that. And one last one there from Julie. Thanks, Julie. So technology, different abilities, particularly around using technology. So we're going to cover off on that as well as we move through. I want to start by talking about self-care. You've probably all seen or heard the demonstration from the flight crew or the cabin crew as the plane is taxiing out of the runway to take off. You know, once upon a time we used to be able to fly all over the place. Not so easy at the moment. And part of the safety demonstration was the message that if oxygen was required, then a mask would drop down from above. And what you were instructed to do was to put your mask on first. Then, when you're breathing normally, you can help others, including children. So for us as leaders today, self-care is becoming even more important than it has been in the past. Our ability to lead, our ability to be the best leader we can be, fundamentally comes down to how well we take care of ourselves first. And there can be a belief, certainly there has been in the work that we've done with clients in the past, that if I'm a parent, if I'm a mum, or I'm just a concerned family member, or I care about my team, I will often put them first. I'll give my oxygen mask to somebody else because I believe that's the right thing to do. And the challenge with that over time is that we start to struggle to breathe, and we're walking around giving our oxygen to everyone else and staggering for breath ourselves. To use another analogy, it's like taking a bucket of water out of the well. Every time I give some of my water to somebody else, I deprive myself. At some point, I have no oxygen left, no water left in my well. And at that stage, I'm a less capable leader. I don't think as clearly, I don't make good decisions, I don't empathise well, I don't listen as well. It also changes my energy. If you can think of a time when either yourself or somebody that you know of was at that point where they'd literally just been giving their oxygen to everyone else and they had run out. Energy at that point is particularly low and an impact on everyone around us. And we don't need to be in the same room as someone else to affect them energetically. That can happen on a Zoom call. So if I'd not been practicing self-care, I have been, but if I had not done that and I'd run myself down to the point where I was really just sort of struggling, and you know, look, it's I don't know, maybe you guys just read the words on the slide, because I'm really tired and I'm really struggling. This is tough, you know, and I don't really care. So anyway, that's where we can end up sometimes if you don't practice self-care. It might be a little over dramatic, but that's me. I'm a ham, a grey ham. So self-care, so important for you. And it's also a really powerful message to send to your team. It's a very powerful message if you have kids at home at the moment, to also send to your children, younger kids and particularly teenagers. And self-care is not selfish. So self-care is not looking after me at the expense of someone else. Self-care is not, I'm more important than everyone else, but I'm as important as everyone else. So my care is important. When you look after yourself first, you're better able to then lead your team. And all of the things that great leaders do come from that. So self-care, hugely important. I have a question for you. What are some of the things that you currently do to refill your oxygen tank or to put water back in your well? Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, it's my best joke. It's the only joke I've got. So what are some of the things that you're currently doing, or what are the practices that you have around self-care? I'd love to hear. Again, please feel free to share with us in the chat. From Wendy, try and sit outside for lunch each day. Spectacular, Wendy, thank you. Jeanette, funnily enough, naps. And actually we do. We have been working on, because we're now grandparents, Nana or grandpa naps, and having a nap every day is spectacularly good. Roxanne, thank you. Great to see you on the webinar. Going for a walk every day. From Robin, hi Robin, getting some sun and exercise. All of this is so important. When we get busy, because there are so many things to do, and I've got a task list or a to-do list as long as my arm, and I've got all of these things, and I've got calendar invites and reminders, and I've got Zoom calls, and I've got team members I have to look after, and now I've got the kids at home, and my partner's yelling at me because this, and I need to take the dog for a walk, and all of this stuff going on. And often when we're in that really busy, hectic space, the first thing that goes is us. So hugely important for us to remember that you are as important as everyone else. And if you're not currently doing something to practice self-care, then I would highly recommend just find one thing that you can do. Even 10 minutes a day can have a huge impact, whether it's going for a walk. where it's just sitting outside under a tree, 2 metres away from everybody else. You can wave to your neighbours across the fence. There's another thing you can do, actually. If you normally connect with your neighbours, then get on the phone and have a chat to them and say, hey, how about you go out your backyard and I'll go out in my backyard, and we'll maintain a space of 3 or 4 metres, but let's just have a chat. Or maybe we could go out on front line if we live in that sort of property, that sort of environment. From Chris, stretching, awesome. Christine, wake up every day, put my feet on the floor and say, today is going to be a good day. And I think that's fantastic. Danette shared with me a little while ago a practice she read somewhere. And again, it's the same sort of thing. Wake up in the morning before you get out of bed. Because let's face it, if you woke up, that's fantastic. Because the alternative is not really something I'm looking forward to. Wake up every morning before you get out of bed. Put a smile on your face. Then just say, today is going to be a great day. And we could talk about all of the science behind things like confirmation bias and the fact that the habit, the tendency the human brain has to look for evidence to back up a belief that I hold. So if I tell myself in the morning, I believe it's going to be a phenomenal day, and I hold emotion around that belief, my brain is literally like the genie in the lamp. It's then going to look for evidence to back up my belief that today is going to be a spectacular day or an awesome day or a great day. And the reverse is also true. If I wake up and think, oh, it's going to be a disaster today, it's just going to be terrible, I wish today was over, I can't stand it, my brain is going to go and find evidence to back up that belief as well. Choose your beliefs wisely. And you can literally change the day that you're having by changing the way you think about it at the start of the day. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Let's move on a little further. One of my favourite sayings, I've attributed to Mrs. Anonymous. It's not mine. I used a lot, but I can't remember where I saw it, and I haven't been able to find an author for it. And that is, don't get furious. Get curious. Curiosity is a beautiful space to be in, particularly at the moment, given everything that's going on out there, given all the uncertainty, the fear, the panic, the disruption to what we thought was life as usual, business as usual, work as usual, and then all of a sudden it's not. And we're not sure where it's going to end up. So trying to stay curious throughout all of this can be very, very powerful for us as leaders. And one of the benefits for that is that we can help influence our team to also step into that sort of curious space a little more. And one of the things I love most about being curious is that we can't be judgmental at the same time. It's like they exist on opposite sides of the universe. So I can be judgmental, and if I have judgment about something, that's usually fear-driven. So, that person who took all the toilet paper is an X, and my neighbour's not practicing safe distancing, and I think that. Get out of the judgment, stay in a curious space. Ask yourself better questions. I wonder why. So in the context of you leading teams remotely, curiosity is also immensely powerful for you to stay curious about what's going on for your team. And I want to acknowledge that we all had, I emphasise the past tense, plans, whether they were team plans, personal plans, organisational plans, business, strategic goals. All of us were working on some level towards plans. Danette and I had plans for our company. We had a plan at the start of the month. We have a different plan now, very different. And I think that's the same for most of us. So the curiosity thing can also be really helpful in that sense, in not getting too judgmental about the fact that we need to stick to the plans that we had, because a lot of things have changed. So one of the other questions I thought might be helpful is just thinking about what are some of the things that might be happening for your teams at the moment? And some of the really obvious ones are, disruption to the work environment. So for those of you whose teams are now working exclusively from home, that can be a massive disruption. all of a sudden, all of the people I had around me every day when I was doing my work, all of the resources, the workstation, everything's changed. And yeah, okay, I might be working from home, and it's sort of, that's more familiar, but at the same time, it's massively different. A couple of you have already mentioned technology issues. And this is, again, this can happen at every level. So we've been working with some clients who are still playing catch up because their business continuity plans, if you like, didn't necessarily encompass having to deal with everybody in the organisation suddenly working from home. So we go from having, on average, 70 or 80 staff working remotely to 500 staff working remotely, and that happened in the space of 3 days. So the technology, and of course one of the other aspects of technology is how well do our teams, what are their technical skills like? And the other side of that, I guess, is thinking about how do I make sure that they know who to reach out to if they're struggling with some technical issues. One of the other technology things that can come up in a moment are just basic things like Wi-Fi. We would expect that everybody has internet access. Certainly in Australia, most of the people who go to work every day, for a lot of you, Wi-Fi access is not necessarily an issue until we are trying to work from home, when we've got kids at home and perhaps a partner at home, and if we've got teenagers and they're doing homework but then they're on Netflix or they're on YouTube, and all of a sudden things grind to a halt. Having family and others at home is also a huge disruption for many of us, because it changes the dynamic in terms of how we think, how we can operate, how much time and space we have to be creative, to just focus on our tasks, etc. Some of the other challenges for teams, and this also applies to some of you, or probably to most of you, is around uncertainty. There's so many questions in terms of what's going on at the moment. And then, of course, there's, underneath all of that, the anxiety, stress, nervousness that can come out of all of that disruption, uncertainty, and everything else. So the curious thing is reminding ourselves to try and stay curious about how our team are going and what's coming up for them, what's impacting on their health and well-being, what's impacting on their sense of calm, or calmness, if you want to use that word. And anything we can do to help address that is going to help the team perform much better. Now, I have a quick pop quiz for you, if I may. And I'm curious to know what your take might be on the #1 reason for staff wanting to work from home. Now, this is based on an annual survey, a company that surveys 5,500 organisations around the world. The #1 reason staff wanting to, this is not staff having to work from home, staff wanting to work from home. Fewer distractions overall, fewer meetings is a possibility. For some people, it's, I get to work in my jammies. Jammies pyjamas, for those of you who are probably too cool to use jammies. For some people, it might be better work-life balance, no commuting stress. And look, I have to admit, because Danette and I generally work from home if we're not on the road doing workshops, the community's tough. It's tough. Honestly, it's like 8.3 metres, like from my bedroom out around onto the veranda onto my desk, and it's just sometimes it's hard work. So not having to deal with the commute, and the other one is I can cook anything I want for lunch without people yell at me because it smells funny. So I'm curious, again, jump on the chat box. Which of those do you believe was the #1 reason for people wanting to work remotely? I'll give you 38.5 seconds. Okay, from Freya. Natalie, commuting. Freya, not my reason, but I'd probably say people wanting to work in the jams. I would have gone with that one too, Freya. Thank you. Julie, thank you. Better work-life balance. Samantha, work-life balance. Chris, commuting. Another Chris, better work-life balance. You guys are all over this. It is, in fact, better work-life balance. Helen Fraser, no commuting. And from Christopher, also commuting. So again, I guess it depends on where you are and what you struggle with more than anything else. But interestingly, the work-life balance has been, this survey has been run since 2013 every year. So this is, the results came in from last year's study, so that's 6-7 years in a row. And work-life balance has been the #1 reason all the way through. Something for us to keep in mind again as team leaders. How do we help maintain a sense of work-life balance for our teams, given everything that's now going on? Okay, we'll come back to that later in the webinar. I wanted to talk briefly now about what could be going on in our brains, and certainly what might be going on in the brains of some of our teams as they're working remotely and trying to manage everything that's happening. And I wanted to address this using a model called the SCARF model. Now, some of you may have seen, read or heard about this before. Some of you may have done the online test. I'll talk about that later in the workshop. SCARF was a model developed by David Rock and a couple of other people at the Neuro Leadership Institute. We've used it a lot in the last probably decade since I found out about it, and I find it a really helpful way for understanding how the human brain functions and what it looks for in the context of interacting with other human beings. So SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Really quick overview. Status, our brain pays a lot of attention to our sense of status in relation to someone else's. If I feel that my status has been lowered because my boss yells at me for not doing something, I get a status threat. Now, a threat response is bad. It makes us feel bad. Cortisol goes up, dopamine goes down. We don't feel good. If I get a reward response, on the other hand, that's when my dopamine level goes up, cortisol goes down, and I feel really cool. If my boss gives me an awesome piece of feedback, particularly if I wasn't expecting it, I'm like, wow. If the head of the organisation comes out and says, I love your work, thank you so much for everything you're doing, even bigger status award because that's the boss. And I'm maybe down here somewhere. So my status is elevated. Certainty is probably the biggest challenge for us at the moment. We like to have some sense that we know what's coming up. As human beings, we do. It makes us feel comfortable. When I have no certainty at all, which is where many of us are sitting at the moment, or don't have much, that's a problem. Again, our brain experiences that as a threat. So all of the uncertainty around the coronavirus at the moment, and the number of cases and the number of infections and the fatality rate, and is it spreading, is it stopping, is it working, is the testing working, when are we going to have a vaccine, will my family get it, will my mum and dad get it? My mum and dad are up in the hall near Canberra, and the mum has been moderately unwell for some time, and that is a concern for me. So all of this uncertainty can trigger threats in our brain. Autonomy. If I could throw the question out to the group. Quick show of hands for those of you who love being micromanaged. And I'm guessing that I'll get a flood of responses from people, excuse me, on the chat box saying, yeah, I love it. I've never met anybody who genuinely likes being micromanaged because it robs us of our sense of autonomy. Some of the uncertainty, some of the things that we're experiencing at the moment is also draining our sense of autonomy because I'm just not really sure. I'm now being told that I can't go out, that only essential travel is being allowed. We were chatting with a client of ours on the Isle of Man day before last, and they had police patrolling the street. Now, it's a much smaller space than the island of Australia, but they had police patrolling the streets and actually stopping motorists from time to time to ask whether, is this travel that you're doing essential? If it's not, go home. So that robs us of a sense of autonomy as well. That's a threat. We don't like threats. Make us feel bad. They mess with our head. So autonomy is also hugely important. Relatedness is the other area where we can be experiencing strong threats at the moment because we're being told that we have to stay home. And this is potentially more important for people who live by themselves because their opportunities to socialise have been greatly restricted. So this is a certainty, autonomy and relatedness. It's like a triple whammy. By the way, if you're a team leader and you know you have people on your team who live at home and are generally quite extrovert, or you know they're strong extroverts, I'm not suggesting single them out, but certainly just be a little bit more mindful of checking in with them on a regular basis because they will struggle with not being able to socialise with people. Now, face-to-face video helps. Face-to-face is probably better, but online video is the next best thing. So relatedness, it can also be a source of concern and threat for people at the moment, because we're being told. I don't like the term self-isolate. What was a term I read the other day? I'm grounding myself at home. I much prefer that, not staying grounded. That's probably better. And then the last scarf domain is fairness. Our brain has a lot of attention to whether we believe we're being treated fairly by others. In the context of what's happening at the moment, maybe yes, maybe no. The upshot of all of this is our brain is paying attention to a lot of threat. Now, by default, the human brain pays attention to threat more than it does to reward. Threats are normally noticed by the brain faster, the threat response is stronger, and it usually lasts longer. So again, this is just hopefully helpful information in the context of what can be going on for us, and also what can be happening for our teams as we try and work through all of this. One other really useful model that I saw on a webinar from the Neuro Leadership Institute last week was around threat levels. And generally they were talking about levels existing on three levels. So level one is where threats in the broader environment. And probably a good example of this is coronavirus. And when it was first identified, or at least first published, it was in China. So we're in Australia, China's over there, probably in the wrong direction, but it is what it is, you get the idea. So it was a threat, but it was in the broader environment. It was a long way away, didn't know much about it, but yeah, it didn't sound too bad. So there may have been a mild level of additional alertness in my brain, just paying a little bit more attention to it, but otherwise it's like business as usual, I'm okay. Level 2 threats is where the threat moves from the broader environment into my neighbourhood. So coronavirus has gone from China, all of a sudden it's into Italy, Iran, the US, and then all of a sudden it's in Oz. And worse still, if I'm paying attention to and following the news, I might find out that there have been cases diagnosed in the city in which I live. That is definitely level 2 threat. The next step from there is when somebody that I know, perhaps a family member, a friend, a colleague, is diagnosed with coronavirus, COVID. So all of a sudden, that is like right up in my face. And what's happening as these threat levels change is the chemicals in our brain and the chemicals in our body are also shifting. So each time a threat level goes up, as I move from level 1 to level 2 and then into level 3, by the time I hit level 3, I am in constant fight or flight. Now, as a human being, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the fight or flight response was, evolved to keep us alive. But in terms of how well we function, it's a huge problem, because we know that one of the things that happens in our brain is that when we're feeling relaxed and pretty okay, because I'm wearing my unicorn onesie and it's Wacky Wednesday and I can do that, it's good. When I'm feeling okay about everything, my brain functions quite well. Blood flow is divided evenly across the brain, and lots of blood flow goes to the front part of our brain, because that's the part that we use to process information, to make decisions, to listen, to communicate, to remember. We use the front part of our brain most when we're awake. When we hit level 2 and then level 3 threat and the stress response spikes up, most of the blood flow to the front part of our brain is stripped away. So the part of the brain that we need to use the most has gone bye-bye. And we're now pretty much just an emotional creature. Our brain is literally getting our physical body ready for fight or flight. I'm going to fight off the threat. I'm going to run away. Now, in short term, this is perfectly okay, because it could help us survive through an experience. But when we're in that heightened level 2 or level 3 stress response or threat level all of the time, it's really bad news. So again, as team leaders, what does that mean? 1, be aware of where you're at. Now, level 2 threat is okay, but if you notice that your level 2 is starting to shift into a level 3 threat response, that's when you need to take action to bring it back down. So first, are you okay? And then secondly, think about your team. What are you noticing about them? Where do you think their threat level is? And sometimes it might be a good idea to have a conversation with them just to check in. Not as a manager or a leader to a team member, but as a human being to another human being. Are you okay? How's everything going? Do you want to chat? Some of the other things that are coming up for us at present, in the context, again, of our teams, remotely, everything that's going on in the wider world. It's fun. It's fun. Yeah, we have a potentially life-threatening health risk. That's not fun. So we are concerned as human beings about what's going on. We're concerned about our health, what we could be. I could be concerned about the health of my family. Personally, again, I mentioned my parents, I am. Very much. My mum is in, I love you, Mum, I hope you never see this, but my mum is in probably the highest risk category that there is. She's okay, but it's still something that I'm concerned about. We can also be concerned about the broader health of planet Earth. What does this look like for us? If we don't get a vaccine for this thing, if the measures that governments have put in place to try and stem the spread of the virus, if that doesn't work, what does that mean? So that's an uncertainty. One of the other great uncertainties for many of us at the moment, which is, and again, I applaud the government for trying to do something about this, for taking steps, but it's the financial situation. Is my job secure? For many of us, it's not. It doesn't exist anymore. And then I'll worry about the financial situation for the people that I care about. I worry about the financial situation for our kids. Now, fortunately, some of our children work for us. And at the moment, we're okay, so they're okay. But that's not the case for all of us. My uncertainty can extend out into the broader community. What's happening in the town or the suburb that I live in, and what's the impact likely to be for them and for my sporting club, and the economic impact for Australia, and where's all the money going to come from to pay wages for everybody? And then the big question is, well, what next? Where are we going? What is Australia going to look like in a month's time, in 2 months' time, in 6 months' time? Will my job still be there? Will the department still be the same? There's a lot of uncertainty out there. So the level 1, 2 or 3 threat model, again, just bear in mind that we're all on there somewhere. The ideal goal is to try and stay at level 1 as much as humanly possible. If you're in level 2, do whatever you can to stop moving up into level 3. If you or you know somebody who seems to be in that level 3 threat state, then again, what are some of the things we can do to help bring them back down? Okay, so I want to move on from the uncertainties to a quick quote from Larry Dixon. Again, this is about teams. So winning teams, the least amount of distractions, a really tight group of people working towards the same goal. Which leads me to a question. And that is, what are your team's most important goals at the moment? Are they work or are they personal? What are your most important goals right now? If we just look at what are your goals for the remainder of this week? What are your goals for April? Primary goals, personal, and then work, a bit of both. Work first because work's important. We still have to get stuff done. I'm not suggesting that there's necessarily a right or wrong answer, but it is, I think, something for us all to ponder. And it's certainly something that Jeanette and I have been dancing with, is how much focus do we put on the business? We need to keep the business going because we want to continue to be able to pay ourselves and pay our staff. But at the same time, we need to make sure that as human beings, they're okay. And we need to make sure that we're okay. So business as usual, whatever that means. Yes, work's important, getting stuff done hugely important, but at the same time, let's make sure that we're looking after ourselves and looking after our people. Some of the comments coming through, one of my team's in the middle of buying a house. Wow. Conflicting, thanks Natalie, conflicting priorities for everybody. And you're putting people first, their health and everything else, and I applaud that. I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So again, in the midst of everything that's going on, as leaders, as managers, team leaders, etc., please make sure people come first because that will matter so much more in the long run. than any business plan or any work plan. Some of the things that you can do to help get your team focused on work goals. And by the way, when I say that, it is important that we take care of our people first. It's also important that we get our team focused on goals, because that will actually help them feel better. If we want to, I was talking before about the scarf domain and threats. So one of the ways to offset a threat somebody might be experiencing is to create a reward feeling for them. And one of the ways we can trigger a reward response for someone is to give them some certainty. And we can do that in the context of work goals or work plan. And that might be going back to, okay, well, these are the goals we had at the start of last month. Things have changed a little bit. So let's talk about the goals that we're going to work towards for April, for argument's sake. Or let's talk about the goals we're going to work towards this week. And if I, as a human being, as part of a team, and I'm stuck at home and I've got family and kids and a partner running around, and I'm trying to manage all of that, but I at least know that these are my goals for this week, that gives me some certainty. That will make me feel a little bit better. So the important thing for you as a team leader, as a manager, before you start having conversations and Zoom calls or meetings, Skype, whatever, Microsoft Teams, whatever platform you're using, fix your own focus first. Get really clear on what's important first. Then you can start the conversation with them. If you're not clear, don't have the conversation. Put everything else aside, sit down, get clear, do some journaling. If you need to, contact us. We'd be happy to share a call if that would help. So fix your focus first. Once you're clear, then you can have a conversation with your team about where we move to. And keep that threat reward thing in mind. So if you notice that people are experiencing some threats, what can you do to help create a reward? And it might not be around certainty, it might be around autonomy. So we can talk about the work plans, and you can basically say to them, look, do it however you want to do it, get it done the way you want to get it done, I'll leave it entirely up to you. And sometimes, again, that's a heightened sense of autonomy. I can pretty much choose the time, how I get it done, if I have to work with anyone else in the team. But if it's my job, my show, that heightens my sense of autonomy. That's a good reward to get. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're doing at the moment to keep your team focused on their goals? Again, please, you've been fantastic so far with the chat function. I really appreciate some of the feedback that's coming through. So I'd love to hear, again, what's working for you at the moment, keeping your team focused. And I should, share one thing that we're doing is weekly team meetings. Excuse me for a second. Apparently I'm challenged when it comes to drinking. We have a weekly team huddle with our team. So we have a team, one team member is about 2 kilometres east of where we are on the farm, with people in Melbourne, people in Canberra and in Hervey Bay. So we bring them all online using Microsoft Teams. Sometimes we use Zoom, but we do have a weekly huddle to check in with everyone. Natalie, thank you. Daily catch-ups, which is awesome. Another Natalie, setting out key priorities each week and ordering them, so prioritising those. Having competitions, trying to add a bit of fun and difference into the team calls. Great idea. Reese, thanks for sharing. Daily video chats helps keep things personable, absolutely. From Christopher, having regular FaceTime catch-ups, love it. Another Chris, daily and afternoon updates, thank you. From Freya, daily Skype video catch-ups, one-to-one sessions weekly, awesome. From Robin, having a team bake-off next week. Can you send us an invite to that, please? Pretty please? Hey, please. I like the idea of a team bake-off. I'm not sure who's going to judge the tasting of that, but it's a great idea. Haven't seen the rules yet from Robin. Okay, let us know how that goes. My daughter posted some photos online the other day of some homemade hot cross buns. Anyone who knows me knows that I have something of a fondness for hot cross buns. So I'm thinking of making an illegal trip it's not really illegal from New South Wales across into the ACT to get some homemade hot cross buns because they taste better than the virtual ones. Okay, thank you for sharing all of that. I'm mindful of time, so let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about how you can build more clarity and focus into your remote meetings. Some of you already touched on these things already. One thing you can do, make them more social. In fact, we'll go through each of those in a little more detail. We'll talk about sound and lighting. Let's just do this. Make it social first. When you have a team meeting with your team, whether it's weekly, daily, hopefully it's at least weekly, start social. Find out a little bit more about how they're getting on as human beings. Then bring the work in. Always start social. Make it social first. Yes, you can put some time limits around that, but make it social. Hugely important. If we want to talk about how we can build more trust in teams, we talk about a project or a study that Google led within their own organisation a few years ago called Project Aristotle, where they looked at 120 odd teams. They interviewed hundreds of people. They were trying to find an answer to the question, what makes some of our teams perform so much better than others? And the number one reason was psychological safety, which is a big fancy Google term for trust. One of the quickest ways to build trust with other people is genuinely be interested in them as people, not as colleagues and workmates, but people. So start social, make it social first. Another really important tip is make a big production out of it. Not really. Video calls are 1,000,000% better than phone calls, and they in turn are way better than text or emails. So on the scale of how we communicate, how we connect with other human beings, face-to-face, in person is always best, but the next best is video. If you're going to hold video calls, Zoom calls, Skype, Teams, whatever platform you're using, work on getting lighting right, and I'm conscious that ours isn't as good as it could be, so, and work on getting your sound as good as you can possibly make it. You can also have a protocol around everybody uses video, because one of the great things around video is I get to see a lot of the visual cues that I miss if we're just on the phone. So sound and lighting, really important. Make an effort, try and get that right before the meeting starts, and encourage everybody on your team to do the same. Focus forward. It's really easy at the moment to get caught up on everything that's happened, whether it was 5 minutes ago, yesterday, the day before, last week, a month ago, 6 months ago. It's really easy to get caught up on that. But what we need to do is get everybody looking forward. So focus on what's coming up, focus on what we're doing next as a team, as an organisation, and try and keep everybody there. One other really great tip that we got, that I picked up from a webinar earlier in the week, was this idea of parallel processing. So what often happens is meetings is we run meetings in serial. So we go, one person has mentioned, talks about their thoughts about a topic, and then somebody else will talk about their thoughts, and then we go around one at a time. And it can be really slow, time consuming, not necessarily as effective as doing it in parallel. So parallel, one way of using parallel processing, particularly online, is exactly what we've been doing with the chat function. So if you have a team and there's a question or an issue that you're grappling with, rather than going around one at a time, you can ask everybody to share their thoughts in the chat function. Or if you're using a platform that has like a virtual whiteboard or little post-it notes or sticky notes, you can get everybody to write their thoughts on a sticky note, and they all go up on the board at the same time. So we're literally working in parallel. It's a huge boost to creativity, and it's also a great way of speeding up and making meetings more productive. One other really helpful tool that we've used with a lot of clients in the past is this idea of daily huddles. And if I could offer just one thing right now that I think would make a huge difference to your team, just in terms of connectivity and feeling connected, have a think about having a 5 to 10 minute daily huddle with your team. Make it really, really short. So one of the models we've used in past with clients is everyone on the team, and again, okay, this is serial rather than parallel, but bear with me. You really quickly go through the team, and each team member shares one thing that they're grateful for from the day before. So it's one little win that they had. Secondly, what are they working on today? And third, is there anything they're stuck on? That's it. So each person can get through all of that. It's not storytelling, it's just bang, bang, bang. Each person gets through all of that in about 30 seconds, 45 seconds maybe a minute tops. So if you've got a team of 10, that's 10 minutes absolute max or out the door. But it's a great way of reconnecting, refocusing at the start of the day, if you can make it happen. So worth thinking about. The last part of the webinar was about communications. So some things to think about here is how can we use language as a team? It's not just me as the leader, but how do we introduce and continue to use language that frames working remotely or working virtually as a positive? And this is immensely important in the context of health and well-being, creativity, connectivity, etc. Staying positive. So let's think about how we make working remotely a positive. Again, the conversation with one of our clients this morning, who are phenomenal, having Monday madness, wacky Wednesdays, Friday fun days. So how do you make fun out of all of this? Do what you can to increase certainty, autonomy and relatedness for your team, and start from the position that you can't over-communicate until somebody pushes back and says, well, you're really bugging me. I don't need that many phone calls or follow-ups or catch-ups or Zoom calls. Can we have a few less? When you get that feedback, then you can maybe wind back a little. But for now, over-communicate. Communicate more than you ever have. Start social, connect as a human, and then get into the work stuff. But make sure that you're doing that consistently. Pay attention to each team member's needs. And just be ready to adapt, because all of the stuff we're talking about today may be different next week or the week after. Some things that you can do to stay connected, we've talked about most of these. So daily, weekly team meetings, use video, start social, be positive. You can have monthly online lunch and learns, you have virtual lunch or coffees. We've had a few virtual coffee meetings so far this week, and literally it's a virtual cup of coffee, and we have a meeting and conversation. Some of the meeting platforms that are out there that might be available, again, I want to acknowledge that for government clients in particular, it's not always easy to get access to some of these. We use Zoom a lot. We have been using Zoom for probably 3 or 4 years now. Some of the other platforms we use internally, we use Microsoft Teams. There's just some additional functionality that we get because we're using Office 365 that Teams works really well for us. But there are other apps like WhatsApp, Google Hangouts. I think you can do video on Messenger. I don't use Messenger, but I believe that you can. So, and thanks, Danette, for reminding me. Yes, the funniest virtual coffee we've had so far this week was the unicorn onesie coffee, which was just spectacular. So I have a question for you before we wrap up, and I'd love to hear from you. Probably final question from me for you. What's one thing that you're going to do after the call today to work on becoming a more effective leader for your team? Please feel free to share. Thanks, Wendy. Confirm who is living alone. Yeah, I think that's really important. And by the way, when I was talking to extroverts, introverts, it's also important to note that introverts will also be feeling quite uncertain and maybe struggling, despite the fact that normally they like some time alone. Having lots of time alone is not necessarily going to help them either. From Danette, thanks, Dylan. So work on messaging more for certainty, autonomy and relatedness. Really important. Communicate as much as possible. Connect with staff socially. Thanks, Roxanne. That's great. From one of our Natalie's, well, we started on informal competitions for the best background space. Ooh, I like that. It's the background. I'm guessing background space for your video calls. In which case, our next webinar is going to be held outside in nature, maybe. Thank you, Natalie. So from Reese, be more flexible with working hours. I think that's hugely important. From Freya, make sure I prioritise my self-care. Love it. Thank you. Continue to connect with staff. From Christine. Hi, Christine. Take better care of myself, please do. So important. Bridget, be flexible enough to allow my staff to be emotional when they are under threat. That is a massive awareness, Bridget, and thank you so much for sharing that. You know, if there's one thing that we could probably all get better at, it's the emotional side of things, because that's where most of us are, and we're going to be for a long time to come, I think, is emotional. So being able to help our staff express their emotions, I think, is going to be very important. Chris is just a Friday fun day virtual bake-off. From Natalie, practice what I preach to the team. Take regular breaks. I advise the team to do this, but I need to do it myself. Yes, you do. And we will be checking in on you to make sure you do. Robin, ask questions about what's happening at home and active listening rather than straight into advice. Yeah, we love giving advice. It makes us feel good. But sometimes the best thing we can do is just be present. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm mindful of time. So a couple of things before we wrap up, if I can. Some helpful advice. Now, by the way, we will be sending an email out to all of you on the call with a link to the recording, which will also have, we'll also provide links to these resources in the email so you'll get faster access to them. But Dan Edwards does some amazing research on human beings and people and teams and things. Just some great strategies for virtual teams, remote workers. Harvard Business Review had an interesting video on how to collaborate effectively when your team is remote. Good article in Forbes magazine about, again, tips to manage remote employees. And there's actually a podcast called Leading Remote Teams, which you might find helpful as well. So all of that will be in the email that will come out to you after today. I wanted to just quickly mention, in case you weren't aware, that we have some other webinars coming up at the moment. And again, all this is just us trying to help as best we can. So we've got a webinar tomorrow on helping the children to learn at home and how you manage with all of that. For some of us, again, becoming a school teacher as well as a parent and a worker, it's like, how do I juggle all of this? So we're going to have some helpful stuff for you tomorrow, helping your kids to learn. Friday, we have another webinar about the 3 C's to thrive in disruptive times. So we're talking about being calm, being curious, and staying connected. And then Monday, we have a webinar on building your resilience and resourcefulness. Now, again, all of these will be available from our website. If you want to register, if you can't find the link, just shoot an email back to us, learn@magicallearning.com, and we'll take care of everything for you. I think that's about it. Any final questions from anyone in the group before we wrap up? Janetti, sending virtual hugs out to all of you. Thank you, darling. I send my follow-up virtual hugs out as well. Bridget, great question. Thanks, Bridget. Any links to learn more about SCARF? Yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is they will be in the email. Thank you for reminding me. SCARF, actually, the Neuro Leadership Institute have an online SCARF, like self-assessment you can do. And there's some other useful resources out there to understand it better. So we will send those out to you. Thank you, Bridget. And for anyone else, if you have questions around that. Sorry, one of my team just sent me a reminder because I need reminding sometimes. We also have a podcast. So this webinar today will be available as a podcast. You find a link to that on most of our social media channels. But if you go to podcast networks, Apple, Google, Spotify, and search Magical Learning, you should be able to find our podcasts. And one other comment from, thanks Jez for that reminder, appreciate that. One other comment from Danette, the SCARF self-assessment can be a really useful tool for all of your team to go through. At the moment, as far as I'm aware, it's still free, but if you would like to chat to us, we'd be happy to help debrief a group session so people have a better understanding of what the self-assessment looks like afterwards, if that would help. That's about it for me. A huge thank you to everybody for being on the call. Really appreciate giving us your time and energy and the engagement that you've had with the chat. It's been fantastic. I hope this has been helpful for you. I've had a lot of fun. So look forward to seeing some of you on the call tomorrow or some of the other webinars that we have coming up. In the meantime, please take care of yourself. Take care of the people you care about. and we will all get through this together. Thanks again for being on the call. Bye-bye.